Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the Autumn 2021 SEFS Seminar Series. I'm Aaron Wersing, Professor of Wildlife Science in SEFS, and I'm also a member of the Program on the Environment's Faculty Council. And it's in that capacity that I'm especially pleased today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Eli Wheat. Eli is a faculty member in the Program on the Environment, where he has worked for the past 10 years and is currently being considered for an appointment in SEFS as an assistant teaching professor with primary responsibility for courses in POE, while also playing a role in helping support academic work at the UW Farm. In his role as lecturer in POE, he teaches courses on sustainability and food systems. Eli is also co-chair of the UW Farm Advisory Committee and is a core faculty member with the Nutrition Sciences program, where he helps deliver a core course in the new Food Systems, Nutrition, and Health major. Eli is the recipient of the Husky Green Award, the College of the Environment's Outstanding Teaching Award, and the University of Washington's Excellence in Teaching Award. In addition to his stellar work and mentorship with the UW Farm, Eli owns and operates a 20-acre certified organic farm on South Whidbey Island. The title of Eli's talk today is Living Sustainability, Nurturing Students at the UW Farm. Operationally, as the presentation progresses or at its conclusion, please send in your questions for Eli via the chat or the question and answer function, and I will then relay them to Eli. Thanks for that. Eli, the floor is now yours.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. And hopefully this will work out great. Okay. So, yeah. So, whoops. Participants can now see. Can you guys see? Suddenly, it's weird. Can you guys, Aaron, can you see my screen?
See your screen. We can see your screen, but it looks like your presentation's in the corner.
That's what it just went there.
Yeah, same thing. It initially looked great, and then it went down to the corner.
Hold on one second here. Let me, we should have practiced this before we got started. Let me try again and put it in presentation mode here. And then I'm going to try again to share. All right, hopefully it stays there. Y'all good? Great.
Excellent.
So yeah, so thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really pleased to be here. And Aaron, thanks for helping host the seminar. The title of the talk I'm going to give today is Living Sustainability. And, you know, part of that just really harkens to sort of the work of growing food and students at the university farm. And so I wanted to start just because a lot of this talk is actually about relationship with place, with the land acknowledgement that is written by a collaborator and friend of mine, Ixaxicha, who is also a graduate long ago of the SEFS program. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot nations, and the Duk-Duwabish, the Duwamish tribe. So with that, I would like to take a moment just to acknowledge where we are and the places that we occupy and the historic peoples and living peoples who are here in this place. Today in the talk, I'm gonna just wanting to outline sort of where I'm going to go and what I hope I'll do. And I'll try to move, you know, forward in a way that isn't, hopefully that's engaging. And even though we're not in person, so that you can stay engaged with what's happening. So in the outline for today, I am going to talk a little bit about sustainability and how it relates to food systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the teaching that I've gotten to do in my time here at the university. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about a really exciting project that I'm working on, which is actually in the realm of research, but has allowed me to do some really fun mentoring with undergrads. And then I want to talk a little bit about sort of future directions, both for mentorship within the university farm, but also sort of in broader picture opportunities. So that's the big vision of where I want to go. So sometimes I think it's possible to ask the question, hold on a second here, about, why is food so important? And, I get to teach an introductory course, Environment 100, which is sort of an introduction to interdisciplinary environmental studies. And in that course, we show a diagram. It's sort of a famous diagram by Johann Rockstrom, and about 1 million other folks were on that paper. And it was the first, like this first paper, there's a sort of bullseye of the planet, and just looking at the different ways in which we've exceeded our planet's capacity to essentially support life on the planet in various ways. And this paper, which came out a few years ago, basically took that very famous diagram and looked at, well, where are we pushing the boundaries of our planet to support our species, and how much of that is agriculture responsible for? And this paper makes a really strong case that agriculture is actually behind a lot of the planetary boundaries that we are currently exceeding. So put in a different framework, our food system is a major cause of planetary overshoot. So it's a really important place for us to kind of begin to dig in as we start to talk about sustainability and ways of structuring our society and our lives differently. Another reason that I think agriculture and food systems are so exciting, and I recognize that I'm talking to many folks who have backgrounds in environmental science and forestry here. So this is a question that students often talk to me about. Like, so, well, how does it compare, like the capacity of a forest to store carbon versus the capacity of grasslands to store carbon? And I imagine we could go around and around and around talking about that. But for my part, especially as a person involved in agriculture and currently working in the arena of food production, I think a lot about the possibility of soil to be a place where we can store a lot of carbon. So this diagram is just sort of looking at where, if we look across biomes of forests, of agricultural lands, and of wetlands, where are some of the biggest opportunities to sequester carbon? And you can see here, the dark bar represents opportunities to sequester stored organic matter, and agricultural lands are rich with opportunity to store carbon. And as I've gotten the opportunity to work with students, I've been absolutely amazed at how so many urban people are drawn to making connections with place through activities related to food production. And so this slide sort of combines a bunch of different ideas, but basically the slide is reminding me to say some of the different ways that urban people get excited about food production. And you can see me here in the top left-hand corner talking to a group of students this past spring, doing a little natural history plant identification at the UW farm at the Botanic Gardens out at the Center for Urban Horticulture. There was a paper that was recently published in PNAS that just looked at, why are people getting engaged in urban agriculture? And they surveyed a lot of different people in different cities in America, and they found a bunch of different reasons that people get engaged in urban agriculture. Access to fresh, sustainable food is high on the list. Reducing food costs, the opportunity to exercise and spend time outdoors, to learn things, to socialize with other people. So there are a lot of different reasons that folks get involved in urban agricultural activities, and all of them, I would say, are for, and looking in a broad picture, ways that kind of enrich and make life more meaningful. And even beyond that, one of the things that I think a lot about is this question of like, well, what could we be doing better on the planet. And when I think a lot about that, I think, well, one of the main destructive forces on the planet is how we do agriculture. And it's really exciting to think that urban people can be part of thinking differently about how agriculture gets done by asking questions, by exploring opportunities, and by engaging in a food system that looks and behaves differently than the one we have. All right. So beyond that, here at UW, we have a university farm, and we aren't the only university with a student farm. There are student farms at universities across the nation. And when you look across the nation at university farms, we could begin to ask the question of why people get engaged in university farms. And one of the reasons that people get engaged in university farms is to gain experience out of the classroom and in the field. University farms are great places for students to learn about agriculture through internship opportunities. And students talk again and again and again about what a value the hands-on opportunities of student farms are. Here are some students at our very own University of Washington farm weeding some beans, which is kind of exciting. Anyway, so within the context of the university farm here at UW, I get to teach and work with a lot of different courses. I work with Environment 240, which is called the Urban Farm. And that course is taught in the spring and in the summer. I also get to teach a course which doesn't have its own title. It's kind of in our catch-all number system. So Environment 495, which is a 1-credit farm seminar that's offered autumn and winter. And that farm lunch seminar covers a different topic each quarter. My favorite was last winter. I got to teach that, and we talked about a feminist approach to farm tools. And it was actually really exciting class, even though it was also virtual, but I taught it out of my farm workshop, and it was really fun. Anyway, I also get to teach a course with the nutrition program, which is called Harvest to Health. And this fall, Harvest to Health Nutrition 302 is going to be having all of its labs on the UW farm, both at the UW Botanic Gardens at the Center for Urban Horticulture, and also at Mercer Court, which is right kind of nestled into the dormitories on main campus. There's also a class I teach, which also doesn't have its own number yet, but is a 5-credit course called Food Production Systems for Sustainability, which is generally offered in the autumn quarter. And one of the things that I find a lot as I get to work with and mentor students on the farm is that they talk again and again about how important the farm is for linking theories with practice. And so I wanted to just kind of read this quote here from a student who took the farm class virtually this spring. So I was, teaching, out of my backyard, making videos sometimes at the student farm and sometimes here on Whidbey at my own farm. And students were watching videos, but having the opportunity, even during COVID, to do some service learning and have some in-person labs at the farm. And one student wrote, it was as if they had summarized the study on like why students participate in student farms. But the student wrote, readings and videos complemented the lectures. Service learning with the UW student farm complemented the theoretical with a practical application. It was so great having video lectures take place on Eli's farm, for example, showing us how to use the soil blocker from his working location. But then in partnership with one of the in-person labs, we were taught on the farm by our farm manager, Perry, how to use a soil blocker. And then again, as service learning, we were able to use the soil blocker. So again, getting different familiarity with the tools involved in urban food production. So I could go like on and on and on, like probably for way too long, about how fun it is to teach at the UW farm. I love being able to use the farm as a sort of living laboratory to explore sustainability. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing in my own research. And so I'm going to just kind of transition a little bit, talk about a small research project that I've been doing, which is inspired by my work with the UW farm, and then kind of circle back again to the UW farm and some of the opportunities that I've had to mentor students in this program. So as I've been involved with the UW farm, and within the circle of folks who are doing agriculture, we've started to hear a lot about this word regenerative agriculture. And the idea of regenerative agriculture is that it's basically trying to move one step forward, moving our agricultural system into a system that helps regenerate ecosystems as opposed to degrade them. And it's taking the organic certification basically to the next level. And folks who are involved in the regenerative agriculture circles talk a lot about the different things that regenerative farms have in common. And there's a big effort right now being led by Patagonia and folks at the Rodale Institute to try to create a real certification process that would be like a third-party certification process for farms to apply for status as regenerative organic farms. And a baseline for that new certification is that the farm has to first earn organic certification, and then the farm can earn sort of this next step in the certification process, which would be as a regenerative farm. And things that regenerative farms tend to have in common is that they're really focusing on minimizing external inputs to their system. So reducing the input of things like fertilizers. They're often engaged in mixed farming. So they're growing more than one crops, and they're often incorporating animals into their system. Mostly regenerative farms are focused on minimizing their tillage, which is exciting to me. So really reducing the amount of soil disturbance that they're doing. They're practicing crop rotation. They're using manures for fertility management. They're incorporating perennials, so plants that don't need to get planted year after year. And they're doing a lot of different creative things to try to maximize the soil productivity while reducing the disturbance to the soil system. So those are all sort of hallmarks of the activities of regenerative farms. And I've gotten really excited about like myself becoming a regenerative farmer. And one of the things that's really at the base of an approach to regenerative farming is to focus on the soil itself, to focus on organic matter. And one of the things I just love about this slide, which comes from a USDA handbook for farmers on how to manage soils, is, there's all these like, and I know Britt Johnson is watching this and you're probably shaking your head, but like what I love about this diagram is like, oh, there's all these complicated things that go into like managing soil, but basically, if you just look at the top here, it's like if you add organic matter to your soil, all these things are going to happen. And baseline, really wonderful thing that will happen is you'll get healthy plants. And I love that. You just add organic matter and you get healthy plants. And, it's much more complicated than that in reality. But as a practicing farmer, it's also not more complicated than that. Like it has been our experience here that as we do a better job reducing soil disturbance and building soil organic matter, our crops are healthier. And natural systems sort of reflect that. And here's just a below ground look at what happens when grass grows. If we're growing perennial grasses, the roots of perennial grasses grow deeply, complicated structures. They reach deeper into the soil system, and the roots of annual plants are much less robust. And those robust root systems do a lot, right? They help nourish the bacterial and fungal community of the soil itself. And all of those pieces of sort of perennial pasture management get tied together through the work of grazers. And so it's really exciting time to be involved in agriculture, to be thinking about how we incorporate animals, how we build pasture, how we can sequester carbon and still meet the food demands of a growing population. So it's a very exciting time. And for those of you who have known me through my career, you probably know that a long time ago, I studied marine ecology. And as a marine ecologist, I worked with oysters and eelgrass. But a few years ago, I was in my office and I happened to overhear a conversation um, about a brand new farm in the Puget Sound that was growing not oysters, but kelp. And that farm had grown an enormous quantity of kelp and was looking for a place to put that kelp. So this was happening all at the same time that I'm beginning to explore what does it mean to be this sort of integrated regenerative farmer, and how can these practices of regenerative farming be practices that I'm incorporating into my teaching at the UW farm, but also into my practice here on my own farm. So I was thinking about all of these things when lo and behold, here's this conversation about kelp. Well, kelp is an amazing substance, right? It grows underwater. It pulls carbon dioxide out from the water. It can reduce nutrient loading in aquatic systems. It can create habitat for aquatic ecosystems. It can be used as human food. And kelp has a really long history of being used to stimulate food production. And so I'm sitting in my office listening to this conversation, the bantering back and forth between a couple of research scientists who are wondering what they're going to do with something like, 14,000 pounds of wet kelp. And I'm just like, oh, wait, I have this idea. We could put the kelp on pasture and begin to measure how that kelp might stimulate the pasture production and pull even more carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester that carbon in the roots. And so for the last couple of years, I've been working on this project to basically address these questions. And so this is a UW student that I've been working very closely with over the last year, Nathan Mock, who actually just graduated from the program on the environment with his undergraduate degree and is come back to UW this fall to enter law school. So Nathan worked with me to basically help get the kelp. We got kelp from Hood Canal Mariculture. They brought it over. And again, the idea here is this kelp has pulled carbon out of the water, and now we're going to move it up and we're going to put it on land. And so this is our experimental setup, actually out at the Center for Urban Horticulture, part of the UW-BG. And you can see our plots all kind of lined out here. And we had different treatments. So our treatments were, we put the some plots got kelp, some plots didn't get kelp. And then in addition to plus or minus kelp, some plots were covered with rime, which is a cloth covering that allows light to penetrate. Other plots were covered with a tarp that would keep light out, but also keep water from kind of really infiltrating a lot. And then there was, of course, a no cover treatment and no plots where there was no kelp and no cover. So anyway, so this is our complicated experimental design and our kelp application. And then this is what the experiment looked like as it was growing on. And we did a bunch of different measurements. And so one of the measurements was we poked little holes in the grass to see how well the grass grew in the plots where there was kelp added versus in the plots where there was not kelp added. And it turns out, like, in the plots where kelp was added, grass grew significantly better. We also looked at the biomass of grass in the plots. And so we had this complicated grid system here, did a little bit of random sampling within this meter by meter grid on each plot. And again, we found that in plots where we treated with kelp, we saw a big increase in the biomass of the grass. And then we, that was my cat. I said, Aaron, my cat might jump. We also looked at in the soils, how the soils were changing as a consequence of the addition of kelp. And, you know, this data is a little bit more complicated, in part because what happens to soils seasonally is more complicated. And yeah, but so we have soil samples, and I just got all that data back, and we began to analyze some of that data. But one of the things that we can see is that where there is kelp with no cover on it, there's a statistically significant difference in the pre and post amounts of organic matter in the soil. And so those trends are a little confusing to me. So I'm sort of just working those out now. And we also have gotten some stable isotope data to be able to trace where the different nutrients from the kelp, you know, if those nutrients are making their way into the grasses or not. So that's the next step of the analysis. And there's a little bit more to do on the project, but it's sort of an emerging project. And I've gotten to work with several different UW students on this project, and it's been a really exciting way to mentor students in, you know, real research work at the UW, even during COVID. And mostly that's because of the efforts of Perry and others to help keep the farm running despite the restrictions of COVID. So it's been a real asset to the university, I think, to have that. But one of the things, if you sit down with Perry and you start to talk to her about what's going on the ground at the farm, is that Perry will talk to you about how sort of overtaxed the resources are that are supporting the farm. She's working a lot of hours to keep the farm running. And part of that is because of the incredible demands of sort of the academy on the farm, you know, in which is trying to balance both sort of the academic demands, but also the production demands. So trying to keep the farm farming, but also meet the needs of the educational community that we're a part of. And in the past 2 years, this is just a list of only within my capacity as a faculty member in the program on the environment, the students that I've supervised independent studies and research projects and capstone projects with that are sort of associated with the farm. So there are a lot, and this is just me. I mean, probably there's other faculty even here gathered amongst us who are helping work with students who are doing projects at the farm. And every time there's a project at the farm, that's another meeting, another time, another thing that's pulling on the capacity of especially Perry, who is the farm manager. So one of the things I'm really excited about getting more deeply involved with this program is thinking about how can we help support academic integration at the farm, providing high quality, high impact learning experiences for our students that they need, while we're still supporting the production demands of the farm itself. So it's a really exciting place to be in, right? To see a farm where there are so many students clamoring for support and activity at the farm. So yeah, so the farm is a wonderful place, and I really enjoy spending time there. And I want to thank all the folks who've been involved in helping the farm grow, helping me get to a place where I get to talk to you all today, especially Perry Ackworth, who's the farm manager, and Yona, who is my colleague in the Food Systems Nutrition and Health program, who also co-chairs the UW Farm Advisory Committee, and has been just a powerhouse of support, you know, for this growing program of the university. And then, of course, lots of folks in POE, students, Washington State Sea Grant, Meg Chatsey, who has been working with me and collaborating on the Kelp project, and lots of other folks. So with that, I'm happy to talk more about things or take some questions. And yeah, I'm super excited to hear what's on your minds.
All right, thank you, Eli.
Yeah, thank you,
So
Aaron.
if anybody has questions, you can send them to me via the chat or Q&A. I'm happy to kick things off with a comment, which is I really love your description of the Kelp project. I've long been sort of an advocate of cross-pollination of marine and terrestrial research, and also drawing connections between work and insights in those two different eco domains. And this is, of course, a really great example of a very direct connection where the product of one ecosystem can fertilize another one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really exciting to think about, and especially interesting place for us as I think the Pacific Northwest as a bioregion is pretty full of lots of great opportunities to think about how we could get involved in doing our fair share of carbon sequestration. But being so close to the ocean is a really amazing opportunity to think about how we could, and the Kelp project itself makes me excited because it's like you get this like 2-for-1 benefit, right? You pull carbon out of the ocean, create habitat, and then you could use it on land to pull more carbon out of the air and then keep it in long-term storage underground. So I mean, in theory, it's a pretty neat idea.
I love it. Oh, I've got a question for you.
Oh gosh.
In the Q&A. Recognizing the need to pick up some of the work that is already on Perry's shoulders at the farm now, do you see additional opportunities to do new things that we are not? Or are we so behind in meeting the current demands that we aren't yet to the point of looking to new things?
Oh gosh, that's a lovely question. I love that question because I feel like, yes, I think there are a lot of demands that I think are falling right now on Perry's shoulders that we can think about how to strategically begin to address. And one of the great opportunities is that this year, the UW Farm has received a grant to work with a grad student, to help us develop a stronger, more comprehensive strategic plan for the farm. And as we do that, I think we can think into both ways to lighten the burden on Perry, but also really think into what are the new opportunities. And one of the things we talk a lot about are the sort of emerging work that we're doing on the farm. So the farm just got a grant for a cultural kitchen. So that's a really exciting, right, opportunity to bridge the gap between the food we're producing, but then how is that food being used? What food are we producing? Can we be growing food that meets the cultural needs of our students and the communities that they're coming from? Yeah, so that's really exciting and a great example of like where the farm can grow, right? Where we become a center that recognizes, the really unique and incredible history of the place that the UW Farm is at, right? And being right on the shores of Lake Washington, being near the site of indigenous food based communities, right, where people would gather to process food. And so it's really exciting to be on the farm and beginning to kind of work more closely with Washabalt and develop these programs where students can explore food, in tradition and in the present, right? So that's super exciting work. And I mean, as we think into other work that's happening, there's a lot going on in the urban agriculture realm right now, where people are asking how much food could we grow in the city, and what's appropriate? How do we do nutrient recycling in meaningful ways in cities? What about hydroponic food production? What about things like sprouts? So, students are clamoring for more. They want to do those kinds of projects. And I think the strategic plan will help us think through how we can get to that question of more in ways that don't kind of burn out the current resources that the farm has. Does that answer your question, Dan? I hope I answered it a little bit without committing the farm to exactly what will happen next, but I feel there's a lot of opportunity.
that sort of leads me to a question that I had about capstones in SEFS. So not every SEFS student does a capstone, but we do have some who do capstones, including wildlife students. And you put up a slide earlier that had a lot of different questions or projects. And I presume perhaps some of them were, or many of them were undergraduate projects.
Oh, all of them. Yeah.
All of, okay. Wow. Yeah. So a lot of things going on. Being a wildlife ecologist, I'm always interested in the sort of intersection between agricultural development and wildlife habitat. I'm wondering, are there any projects that explore that realm, or might that be a direction we could go with wildlife students in SEFS?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And one of the, I mean, golly, yes. Yes. And I mean, a big question that I have that's super relevant to this, both to the farm at the UWBG, but also to farms in what I think of as urban and peri-urban. So peri-urban would be like the region around a city that you can, maybe that you can get to within an easy drive, not super rural, but like close to the city, in the fringes of the city, peri-urban. In peri-urban agriculture, one of the questions that often is present for me as a farmer is when's the right time for me to mow my pasture? So if in the spring, if I can graze a pasture, then I'm going to graze it, right? But the grass grows faster than if I can't stock the number of grazers that I have on my farm to match the spring grass growth. Does that make sense? Like always the grass is growing faster than I can graze. But if I stocked to meet that growth, then I would have a lot of hungry grazers later on. Does that make sense? So there's this grass growth grazer in mismatch. Meanwhile, like I know that, both at the UWBG, but also like here in my own farm, like there are amazing birds that are coming through, many birds that are nesting in pasture systems, right? And so, what's the right way to balance, like when you graze, when you mow, how you maximize the grass growing potential? Yeah. Because that's like what a farmer wants to do, mow to increase grass growth without like at the right time, so you're not destroying the habitat, right? Like I've actually gone to look for literature on that, and I have found like nobody bringing all that thinking together. So that would be an example of something that's like really fast on my mind, oh gosh, like that's a wildlife question, right? Maybe you probably think about bigger wildlife, like, but there's bigger wildlife questions too. And I think there's a lot to begin thinking about in how we manage both urban and the peri-urban agricultural landscape, because those are exciting places where, in non-human animals, or humans, livestock, I mean, it makes up a lot of animal biomass. And so figuring out how we can do that better, differently, in ways that support wildlife feels important.
Yeah, you're right that I often think about bigger taxa, but in my wildlife science class today, I was just telling my students about how so much great science can be backyard science, or farm science, or science around campus or in the city. And I'm often asked by students, well, where would I work? If I want to do my capstone and I can't go very far from campus, where would I work? And I haven't thought a lot about the UW farm, but it just occurs to me with this talk that it's a potentially wonderful resource for directing students who want to get in the field, hands-on experience, really important applied food-related questions.
Yeah, I mean, and another really big, interesting management issue comes down all the time, both, on the UW farm, like it's a constant scourge, is like, how do you deal with the herbivores, the little bunny rabbits that, those, there's questions there that are really interesting to think about. And, for me, like one of the questions that I'm really curious about is what's going on in the small mammal population, smaller than rabbits. But like, I don't, and like, are they voles or are they field mice? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of activity in agricultural systems, and a lot of questions to be asked that would be potentially, questions that students could get into. There's also, I mean, I don't think it falls under your domain of wildlife, but there's amazing questions to think about in regards to pollinators as well. And lots of really interesting questions because cities have really amazing floral communities and often unique relationships with pollinators. So yeah, lots going on for sure.
All right. Well, I've got another question for you here
All
in the chat. My understanding is that the ability of soils to continue to sequester carbon is riddled with limited data and uncertainty, and the rate of sequestration is going to be driven by region, climate, etc. Have you started to take measurements related to this on farms on the west side of the Cascades? Seems like this could be a great set of capstones.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yes, I want to work with Britt on that. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of open questions about like, well, just how far do you get to push this question of organic matter in soils? And, and does it, for, gosh, it's really complicated because for an actual farm that's producing annual crops, that organic matter is in constant flux, right? It's providing, essentially the fuel to feed the crops. And so, over time that, can grow, in the percent organic matter that's stored in that soil, but it's constantly in flux, right? Because it's feeding the bacteria that are releasing the nutrients that are growing the plants. And so there's a lot of questions there about just, how much is too much? And then what happens if you get to this place where you get a lot of organic matter, then, are there a unique assemblage of pests that begin to move in that then are going to affect crop productivity? So those are open questions, I think. And a lot of it is, I mean, that's why I think the Kelp project is really exciting, because we're actually trying to get some data on this idea, like, does stimulating the above ground biomass production lead to any changes in soil and stored organic matter in soils? But yeah, I agree. And I think it would make wonderful capstones.
Another one in the Q&A. Can you please comment more generally on how faculty and or graduate students with research questions they might want to undertake at the farm can go about doing that? Is the role of this new position involved in that?
I think there's a lot that's not described about the role of this new position. But I will say that in the Farm Advisory Committee, Yona and Perry and I have talked a lot about that, because right now there are a couple of research projects that happen at the farm, and research takes a lot of Perry's time because, researchers are not necessarily knowing all the ins and outs of what's going on the farm. And so Perry has to do a lot to support research, but there's no formal process, right? And so one of the things we've talked about is like, could we get a committee of faculty together to vet research proposals? So we put out a call like, do you want to do research on the farm? Here's some questions that you might be thinking of, or maybe you're thinking of other questions. We're here as a resource, and submit a proposal and work with a group of faculty who are supported by the farm manager, but not necessarily taking all of Perry's time to choose some projects that could then happen on the farm, or sort of create some other system of helping share the support that is needed to do good research on the farm. So I think there's, again, I'm hoping that that's an element of the strategic planning process that is happening this year, where we can figure out how to best support, both encourage faculty like Aaron, like you're doing, like thinking into how could we do this, but also to support the farm and like, what is the right quantity of research to be done. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's definitely something that is on the docket for figuring out.
Any other questions from the audience? Kind of winding down to 4:20, but I think we've got time for another one if there's one out there. Well, not seeing any others come in, I think that's as good a time as any to wrap things up. So, would everybody please join me in thanking Eli again for a great talk and chat afterwards. Thank you so much, Eli.
You're welcome. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
I'm seeing a lot of thank yous coming in. And thanks to everyone in the audience for tuning in and sending in your questions.